right, so to start off, the information that you will need when you're completing the FAFSA, so the information that we recommend that you have on hand with the student and the parent. Whenever I make a FAFSA appointment with a student or a parent, I tell them that this is the information that they'll need to bring with them or have readily available. So both the student and the parent social security numbers. And parents who don't have a social security number, they'll just put in all zeros. So we'll also need both parent and student 2021 tax information. It's preferable to have the 1040 and the W-2s, 1099 schedules, pretty much their whole tax information from 2021, because the 23-24 FAFSA uses the prior financial data. So this FAFSA that just opened on October 1st will be using 2021's tax information. In order to do the FAFSA, the student and a parent will need a FSA ID or a Federal Student Aid ID. They can register for the FSA ID at fsaid.ed.gov. So it's a username and password, and that is how both the student and the parent can sign the FAFSA. It's also, this FSA ID is how the student will keep that FSA ID, that unique FSA ID, and use even after they're no longer completing the FAFSA. So for to find out their federal student loan servicer, to do their master promissory note, their entrance counseling, all of that good stuff. So I always recommend when creating an FSA ID for both the student and the parent, that one, the student should not use their high school email address when they are creating this. And I say that because some high schools, they no longer have access to that email after they graduate. Because the email is how they'll recover any passwords or anything like that, and they'll link the FSA ID with that email address. Same thing for parents. They should have an email that that they'll always have access to. So I always recommend using like a personal email, not necessarily a work email or anything like that, for the parent. Student and parent need separate FSA IDs. It's very important that at least the parent and student are not using the same email address. So they will need separate email addresses. Now I understand some parents do say, well, I'm the one who's going to be doing, the financial stuff. So I want to have everything under my email. I would recommend not doing that because you're going to need your own unique email address to do the FSA ID. And technically, you only need one parent to create the FSA ID. So if the student is in a two-parent household, then only one of the parents technically need an FSA ID because only one parent is going to be signing the FAFSA. Both parents can have their own unique FSA ID. Sometimes I recommend that just because further down the line, if the parent if either one of the parents want to do a Federal Parent Plus loan, they will need their own unique FSA ID. Yeah, so if they are retired and they do not file taxes, they obviously won't need to have their 1040. However, even if they're receiving Social Security disability or some form of 401k or something like that, they will need to have that information because it is still considered income in that tax year. You can still complete a paper FAFSA. You can still complete the FAFSA electronically and then not sign it. They will still need to create an FSA ID though, just in order to do the FAFSA, to log in with the information. So they will need an FSA ID. Now, if they don't plan on doing the FSA ID at all, they would have to do the paper FAFSA. Now, I will give a warning with this. So if you're doing a paper FAFSA, it can take up to 45 business days for it to be processed. Okay, that is what the Department of Education states. It could take up to 45 business days for it to be processed. So 45 business days before it is sent out to any schools, or the student receives a student aid report or anything like that. So it takes much, much longer. Yeah. To file the FAFSA. So if you just go to studentaid.ed.gov/FAFSA, or even just studentaid.gov, that will take you to the actually completing the FAFSA. Students do not need to have applied to a college or be accepted to file the FAFSA. So I want to say that again. So students don't have to wait until they get their first acceptance letter into a college before completing the FAFSA. In fact, I would recommend doing the FAFSA as early as possible. The FAFSA opens October 1st every year. So there are some schools that the earlier you do the FAFSA, the more likely you are to get certain financial aid. Certain colleges and universities have FAFSA deadlines, or priority dates. Meaning that the earlier that you do it before the priority date, the more likely you are to get a financial aid award letter before a certain date. There is a FAFSA app available for iPhones and Androids. So I know some students do prefer to use the app instead of doing it on an actual computer. That's absolutely acceptable. It's the same questions, same information. It just looks a little different in terms of like aesthetic as opposed to the app than the desktop version, so the online web version. All right, so these are the FAFSA sections. So there's demographics for both the student and the parent, the school selection, where they will be adding up to 10 colleges or universities who they would like this FAFSA to be sent to. So again, they can put a college on there that they either maybe haven't completed the application for yet or haven't been accepted to yet. So I would up to 10 colleges. If they need to make any changes and want to add more than 10, they can absolutely do that. But what would happen is they'd have to submit the FAFSA all the way through, and then they would have to go back and click make a change. And you'll see that at the end. Make a change to the FAFSA and then remove one of the schools and then add another one. Dependency status. We're going to spend a lot of time on dependency status. I'll go into that. Parent demographics. We'll spend some time on that. And then, of course, the financial information. So I'm not going to go too much into student demographics because that's basically the questions that they're asking are what high school did they go to, their address, phone number, pretty much all of that information. And a lot of that, if the student created an FSA ID and the student signs in with their FSA ID, a lot of that student demographics will already be populated, such as their name, their social security number, their address, their phone number. If they have a driver's license, that's one of the questions in student demographics. The driver's license question is not a necessity, so it doesn't have that red asterisk next to it where they have to ask that question, or excuse me, have to answer that question. And then the financial information, sign and submit, and confirmation. Okay, so dependency status. This is the biggest thing that we see in financial aid that I get questions about every day, all day, when it comes to the FAFSA. So what is a dependent student versus an independent student? So a dependent student is required to report the parents. Students who will be required to include parent information, like their legal parents, biological and adoptive, regardless of the parents' marital status or gender, if the parents live together. Okay, so what that means is if a student is living with their biological parents, both biological parents, but those biological parents are not married, but they live in the same household, both parents have to be on the form. Same thing for divorce separated situations. So if a parent, if a student lives in a household and say, um, mom and dad are divorced, both biological parents are divorced, but student lives with mom and mom has since remarried, mom and the step parent would have to be on the FAFSA. So if the parents are divorced but have since remarried, both parent and the new step parent have to be included. So who is the parent, especially when there's custodial situations? So divorced parents, if they split custody, 50-50, it's who the student lives with more than 50% of the time. Um, and I get this question a lot. Well, what if we share custody and we're 50-50? It's 1 week on, 1 week off. Well, there are 365 days in the year. That is an odd number, so one parent has the student for 1 day more a year. That is the parent that's on the FAFSA. Or if the student didn't live equally with either parent, then the parent who would be listed is who provides more than 50% of financial support for the student in the preceding year at the time they're filing the FAFSA. So for example, if I was doing the FAFSA today, October 31st, and my mom was the one who provided more than 50% of financial support for me from October 31st, 2022 back to October 31st, 2021. That would be the parent who's on the FAFSA. So independent students, it's a set thing. So even if a student doesn't live with their parents, doesn't receive any financial support for them, we get this question a lot. So I don't live with my parents. They don't provide any financial support for me. I rent an apartment. They're not giving me any money, and they're not going to be giving me any money for college. That doesn't matter. So if a parent's refusal to pay for college is not a reason to be an independent student. So I'm going to repeat that. A parent's refusal to pay for college does not make a student an independent. These are the independent questions and we're going to go through that. So an independent student is at least 24 years of age, a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces. That does not mean if a student is enrolled in an ROTC program. You have to have served active military duty in order to be considered a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces and qualify for an independent status based off that. Students who are enrolled in a graduate or professional program. Students who are married at the time of filing the FAFSA. At any time before the age of 13, both parents were deceased if the student was in foster care or a dependent ward of the court. If the student has legal dependents that they provide at least 50% financial support for. And that part's important. So just having legal dependents does not qualify the student to be an independent. So the student has to have legal dependents that they provide more than 50% of financial support for. So if the student has a dependent, but they're living at home with their parent and their parent is providing the financial support for that child, they would not be considered an independent student. Students who are an emancipated minor, an unaccompanied youth who is homeless or at risk of being homeless, or in a legal guardianship as determined by the court in the state of legal residence. So in Pennsylvania, for example. If the student is in a legal guardianship, the legal guardian does not need to go on the FAFSA at all. Now, I will say, we in financial aid recognize that there are certain situations where the parents may not be in the student's life at all, maybe not just simply unwilling to provide financial support, but pretty much any support for the student, and the student doesn't necessarily meet these, if they're not in a legal guardianship, or we're in foster care, or certain things like that, there is a question, and you'll see the question that says, do I want to provide information about my parents? If they put no, what will happen is these schools that they have put on the FAFSA will reach out to the student to ask about the student's situation and as to why the student is unable to provide parent information. And that's up to each individual school what documentation they may require, or if the student has to do an appeal or something like that. Okay, so we're going to go in deep into the dependency question. So this is the actual question that you'll see on the FAFSA. Was the student married at the time of filing the FAFSA? So marital status as of today. So it's either going to be single, married, or divorced. Single, married / remarried, or divorced. So if the student was single and not married, and I have had the question before when I've given this presentation to students, no, if you have a boyfriend, that it's not considered married. Does the student have dependents? Okay, so this is where the question, it asks, do you now, or will you have children who will receive more than half of their support from you, meaning the student, between July 1st, 2022 and June 30th, 2023. So if the student has dependents, but they're not providing more than 50% of financial support, then the question would be no. Does the student have any other dependents other than children or a spouse who live with you who receive more than half of their support from you now and through June 30th, 2023? Answering yes to either one of those questions would make the student an independent. Answering no will trigger the next set of dependency questions.
So let's go a little deeper. 50%, does that include, or what equates to 50% subsidy support? And so, for example, if I'm on some kind of assistance, federal or state assistance, and they give me X amount of dollars, how do I, as a practitioner who's helping a student, calculate if they've done 50% or more?
So in that case, a lot of times, if a student has a dependent and they are receiving some type of either federal or state assistance, that can be considered more than 50% of financial support if the other parent is not contributing financially. So if that parent is contributing financially, either through child support paid, child support received, not paid. So if they're receiving child support through the court system, or if they're receiving some monetary assistance from the other parent, or if the parents are still together but not married, then the student could claim that they receive more than 50% of financial support.
Thank you.
Okay, so then next question if the student answered no, then this is the next question that they'll see. Student foster care and parent education completion. So are you a foster youth, or were you in the foster care system at any time? Answering yes to this question will make the student considered an independent student. This question will also like if the student is a foster youth or was in the foster care system, then this question will trigger a financial aid office to probably ask for additional information, namely because there is specific financial aid that's available for students who were in foster care or were a foster youth. That would be another training on the types of aid that's available for students who are in the foster care. So if you have any students that you're working with who are in foster care or were a foster youth, I would highly recommend, once the FAFSA is completed, to have the student reach out to the financial aid offices of the schools that the student is applying to, because there may be certain financial aid that they are eligible for. Now this question, regardless of how they answer any of the dependency questions. So what is the highest school completed by parent 1 and parent 2? This is question is asked to determine if the student is a first generation student. So if the student is a first generation college student, this question here, they can answer regardless if they are going to be considered an independent student. If they don't know, one of the options to select is I don't know. But that question is simply to just determine if the student is a first gen student. So these are the additional dependency questions. So like I mentioned, are you currently serving on active duty or armed forces for purposes other than training? So are you a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces? Those are the two questions about the veteran thing. So again, ROTC, if they are in ROTC, that would not qualify them as being considered active duty, because they would have to be serving in the U.S. Armed Forces for purposes other than training. At the time, since you turned age 13, were your parents deceased, or were you in foster care, or are you a dependent ward of the court? As determined by the court of your legal residence, are you or were you an emancipated minor? A lot of times, any of these questions, if the student selects any of these, that will trigger a lot of financial aid offices may require additional information relating to any of these questions being selected. And then on or after July 1st, 2020, were you homeless, or were you self-reporting as at risk of being homeless? This question, if it's selected, is yes. So if you do have any students who are currently homeless or at risk of homelessness, selecting yes to this question. So I would also recommend reaching out to the financial aid offices that they're applying to. But if the student is living at home with their parents, but the parent is not willing to contribute financially, or if the parent is, maybe it's an unsafe environment, and the parent's just not willing to do anything for the student in terms of not just financial, but emotional or support or anything like that, they would still select no to this, because the next question, this question here. So if they answered no to all of those dependency questions, it will say that you are considered a dependent student based off of those questions. If you have a special circumstance and are unable to provide parent information, under the limited circumstances, you may be able to submit your FAFSA without parent information. In that case, they will select, I am unable to provide information about my parents. Then it will skip the parent demographics and the parent financials, and it will go right to student financials. The student can sign and submit the FAFSA. Now, in that case, if they say, I am unable to provide information about my parents, that will then trigger the financial aid offices to request additional information in terms of why the student is unable. That would be considered a special circumstance, special circumstances application, or it may be called a dependency override appeal, something along those lines. You'll see at a lot of financial aid offices. Are there any questions about dependency status?
No, we don't have a question about dependency status. We do have a question, Candace Kennard, but other than the state of residence, who is using the first gen information for scholarship?
So a lot of financial aid offices are not necessarily using that question for for any scholarships or financial aid. Certain schools may, but the vast majority that I would say don't use that question. That question is specifically for the Department of Education. The Department of Education is looking at how many FAFSA filers are first generation, and they use that for a lot of different things. that question is not necessarily used for financial aid offices at schools to provide scholarships. If the student is a first-generation college student, there is specific financial aid that's available for them. That is either maybe through the school that they're applying to or through an outside scholarship avenue. We could go into in-depth financial aid and what aid is at another presentation. So that's the dependency status. Okay, so this is a graphic that I actually have printed out and I put it in my office because I use it a lot. So it's when I fill out the FAFSA, who is the parent? So if your parents are married to each other, yes, they would both go on the FAFSA. If they're not, do your parents live together? If yes, both parents go on the FAFSA. Even if they were never married, or they're divorced and or separated, but they still live in the same household, both parents would need to go on the FAFSA. Did you live with one parent more than the other in the past 12 months? If yes, the parent who they lived with more would be the one on the FAFSA. If no, the parent who provided more financial support over the past 12 months or in the last year, that would be the parent. Now, is that parent remarried? Yes. Then that parent and the step parent would both be on the FAFSA. And then some of the people who are not the parent, if the student lives with a grandparent, grandparents do not go on the FAFSA. If the parent if the student lives with foster parents, those people do not go on the FAFSA. If a student is living with legal guardians, the legal guardians do not go on the FAFSA. Their financial information, their information is not considered. They shouldn't be the ones on there. Or if they live with aunts, uncles, cousins, older siblings, they do not go on the FAFSA.
Did everybody get that kind of student they serve? Did they get that their student's situation covered, of student that you serve or have served? Were all your students covered in this graphic? So that, it felt like to me, Cam, just saying this, it felt like a lot, again, it's around like parents that are kind of in or not in the situation versus kids or students rather, who may be with not necessarily, well, let's say they're with mother, again, we always go back and use this scenario, mother, they're with mom, but mom is kind of in and out because she may be going to rehab. Dad is incarcerated. Where does that scenario fit in this chart?
Yeah, so that's one of those, I would say, special circumstances, because if the student, so the legal guardianship is if the student is actually in a legal guardianship and has had, the student has gone to court and a, aunt, uncle, grandparent has legal custody. Not every student has gone through that process. Not every, student has a legal document that says my parents, I live with my grandmother, right? I know that's the case. In that situation, those students would answer, this: I am unable to provide information about my parents. Because even if they're not in a legal guardianship, right, but they're either one or more parents are incarcerated, or one or more parents have substance abuse issues, then that would be a special circumstances. If they don't have like a legal document that's saying like, I live with my, if your student says, I live with my grandma, but I don't have like a legal form that says I live with my grandma because my parents are not in the picture. In that case, they could talk to the financial aid office about that. Any other questions about that portion? Okay.
Yes. So if they do have the legal, the papers to say that they do live with someone else, so do they put that person on their FAFSA? No, still?
No, no. So they would answer that they are in a legal guardianship.
Okay.
So does someone other than your parent or step parent have legal guardianship of you? So they would check, that's a checkbox. So they would check that off. And then what would happen, it would say the next section would say that you, congratulations, this one says, based off of the answers to the dependency status question, you are considered an independent. And then it would say, it would ask you, do you want to provide information about your parents? They don't have to, they can say no. And then it will skip the parent demographics, parent financials, and then go straight to student financials. So if they're in a legal guardianship or anything like that, that legal guardian their information does not go on the FAFSA. Even if they accidentally did, I will say that if they select that they are in a legal guardianship and then they put the legal guardian's information on the FAFSA, that legal guardian's information won't be calculated to the EFC, the expected or family contribution, for the FAFSA, which determines federal financial aid. What happens if they select yes, and then they do put the guardian's information, a lot of times, most times, what will happen is the financial aid office that the student applied to will reach out to the student, because in that case, it's a discrepancy. They'll say, well, you selected yes, but then you put someone's information. So is this person your parent? And if the student says no, then they might ask them to go back and change that. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right, so parent demographics. Parent demographics include the social security number, address, marital status, and other dependents. So other dependents include any siblings that the student may have. It can also include, parents of the parents, so grandparents, or sometimes in cases where the student's parents may have, custody of a cousin or something like that. If they're providing financial support for that person more than 50%, they would be considered a member of the household. So grandparents would be included in this if the parent is providing more than 50% of financial support for that grandparent. So again, other dependents includes anybody that the parent provides more than 50% of financial support for. Again, this can include siblings, grandparents. If they have foster children would be considered a member of the household. So if the student's parents are foster parents, those foster children would be considered as members of the household and would be the other dependents. Is there any questions about the parent demographics before I move on to the financials? Oh,
Yeah,
that's an excellent question. Do those dependents that they have to be claimed on tax documents? No. So what happens in a lot of situations where, especially in divorced parents, they may trade off on who claims the child for tax related purposes. But the student could still be, with the parent more than 50% of the time. It doesn't matter if the person is being claimed on the taxes at all. So the tax claiming has nothing to do with this question. All right, so financial data. So again, students are eligible to complete the FAFSA as early as October 1st every year. The FAFSA right now is using the prior tax year. So it used to be just the year prior, but they now do 2 years prior for both student and parent. The reason they made the switch to that is because we would hope that by the time that they file the FAFSA for the 23-24 year in October, that their 2021 taxes would have been filed and completed. Before, when we used to do the FAFSA and it just used the year prior, a lot of times it would say parents would have not had filed their taxes because they have had an extension or something like that. And for verification purposes, which I'll talk about in a second, or certain financial aid information, it couldn't be finalized until there was a completed tax return. So the parent tax filing status. So because it's using 2021 tax information, at the time that the FAFSA is being filed, a parent could be separated or divorced, right, in 2022. But when they filed their 2021 taxes, they could be married, they could have filed their taxes as married filing jointly. In that case, they would not be able to use the IRS data retrieval tool. I think that's the next slide. Yeah. So the IRS data retrieval tool, I recommend that parents and students use this because it pulls over all of the information from the 1040 that's necessary for the most part. So people who can't use the IRS data retrieval tool, obviously, are those who, one, haven't filed a tax return for 2021. If the marital status does not match the tax filing status. So if a parent, like I said, in a divorce situation, a parent in October 31st, 2022 could be separated or in the process or divorced. But when they filed their 2021 taxes, they were married, so they filed a married filing joint return. In that case, that parent would not be able to use the IRS data retrieval tool. They would have to enter their tax information from the 1040 and their W-2s. If the parents are married, but one of them filed as head of household, so they didn't file married filing jointly, in that case, they wouldn't be able to use the head of the data retrieval tool. If they are married, but they filed separate returns, so sometimes people do that. So they would not be able to use the IRS data retrieval tool. Or if they're unmarried parents and they're living together, so both parents are on the FAFSA, but they filed separate returns, they can't use that. Or if they filed a foreign tax return. Now, I will say this, so the address must match the address used on the 1040. When they click the proceed to the IRS, it's going to ask for the address that they used when they filed their taxes. So, for example, because we're using the prior year, if they have since moved, right, in October 2022, they're living at, someplace in Philadelphia, but when they file their taxes in 2021, they were living in Delaware County. They would have to use the Delaware County address, whatever the address is on the 1040. So, and it must match exactly. So, for example, I live in an apartment, and when I have filled out the FAFSA before, sometimes when my accountant will put apartment B, right? But they'll spell out apartment. And whenever I always do it, I just put the letter B, right? In that case, it would consider not matched because I have to put exactly what's on the address, or exactly what's on the 1040, excuse me. Any questions about the data retrieval tool? What if they completed an amendment? That's an excellent question. So if they completed an amended return, they can still use the IRS data retrieval tool. However, what will happen is when information gets transferred back to the FAFSA, it will say that it was an amended return. Now, in some cases, if they did an amended return, the financial aid office will request additional information. They may request that the parent provide their 1040 and their 1040X. So the 1040X is the amended return. So in some cases, that may happen. Okay, so if they are unable to use the data retrieval tool, it's useful that the parent have the 2021 1040, the W-2s and or 1099s. So for those that don't know, 1099s are if they own their own business or something like that, or if they're receiving Social Security disability, or just any other kind of Social Security. 1099s and any schedules, so Schedule C's, Schedule A's, all of that information. I always say that when I'm making an appointment for FAFSA, just bring anything that you got from your accountant related to 2021, and we can sort through it. So the information that you'll need from the W-2 and or 1099 or the schedules are the wages and any untaxed pensions. Information needed from the 1040. So this information is here, but when you're going through the questions, if you didn't use the IRS data retrieval tool, it will tell you on the 1040 for 2021 what line to look at, right? So the information on the 1040 for the adjusted gross income is line 11. The amount earned from work is 1040 line 1 plus schedule 1. Or if you have the W-2s, you can add up all the W-2s wages, right? The W-2s under 1099s. The taxes paid would be 1040 line 22. So, and I'm pretty sure Tom will send this out to you. You know, if you want to have this printed out somewhere, so when you're going through, you can use it. But they do have the questions in there for you. So, if they have either linked the taxes or filled out the information using the line by line method because they couldn't use the data retrieval tool, the next questions that they will receive are just for tax filers. So if they received any combat pay or special pay, that's for veterans or commissioned warrant officers, and they're only entering the taxable pay. So a lot of times, if the person is receiving combat pay, they will have a 1099 or a schedule. I believe it's a Schedule D for this, and they're only putting in the tax amount. This question, okay, so student college grant or scholarship aid reported to the IRS in your parents' income. This includes AmeriCorps benefits, as well as grants and scholarships, supportive fellowships, and assistantships. This question is not if they've received a federal Pell Grant, a PA state grant, or any other form of aid from the college. So if the student got a scholarship when they applied to the university, that wouldn't go on here. The only grant or scholarship aid that's reported is if they were required to put it as income when they filed their taxes. So I see a lot of this question having amounts in it, and it's very rare that a student would have an amount in here because, again, PA state grants, federal Pell grants, work study, that does not go in there. Education credits, that would be on there, and that there you could see it's 1040 schedule 3 line 3. Any untaxed portions of IRA or pension distributions. This excludes rollovers. Any deductions from being self-employment, or any tax-exempt interest income. All of this information is on the 1040 if you have it in front of you. So it will show on there. So if they have IRA deductions or payments for self-employment, it would be 1040 Schedule 1, the total of lines 15 through 19.
So just to be clear,
Mm-hmm.
there are those of us who serve in the community who may have someone who has done an AmeriCorps service.
Mm-hmm.
And they're probably getting what? Is that a 1090? Is that what they're getting for tax purposes? And therefore that's why they have to file on the, or are they putting there, because I was a former AmeriCorps person, right? So I was getting 1040, but I also did get got an award grant, which is separate from the from my stipend money.
Mm-hmm.
Am I putting both of those dollars in here, both of those sets of dollars, or am I just doing my education award? Because I heard you use the terminology, I guess you read it from here, education award.
Yeah, so it's awards, living expenses, and any interest accrual payments from AmeriCorps.
Got it. Okay.
So that would include like the stipend or something like that.
Sure.
And that's, yeah. And this is for the parent. So this portion right here, so that question that you just asked me, is for the parent.
It's for the
If
parent.
the
I got you.
parent,
Okay.
yeah, if the
Right.
parent did any of this, received
Right.
any of this. When we get to the student section, yeah, there is a student section, but you don't want to put anything that's actually the student in the parent section or vice versa. Okay, so the additional parent information. Did your parents have any of the following items in, it should be 2021, I apologize. Child support your parents paid because of separation or divorce or legal separation. So if in the situation where my parents are divorced, I live with mom, and mom's not remarried, it's just me and my single mom in the household, and mom receives child support from dad. That would be that wouldn't be this question if child support your parents paid. So if I live with mom, for this question, if I live with mom, and my mom pays child support to somebody else, that's what this question is. There's a separate question if I received any child support as the parent. So earnings from work under a co-op program offered by a college. So in this case, if a student is on a co-op program and they receive money from employment as part of the co-op program that's offered by the college, they'll receive a 1099 from that college, and that would be put in there. Any need-based employment program. So if the student is receiving federal work study earnings, or excuse me, if the parent is receiving federal work study earnings, that's where it will go. So this is all if the parent is receiving any of these. This is again the parent untaxed income. Child support received. So if me and my mom are in the same household and my mom receives child support. This doesn't include if my mom has foster care children and she receives money for the foster care children. That's not child support. Any housing, food, or other living expenses paid to members of the military, the clergy, including any cash payments or cash value. Do not include the value of on-base military housing. So this is any living allowances that are paid to the parent by the military or the clergy or anything like that. Payments to tax-deferred pensions and retirement savings plans. So this would be where the W-2s come in handy because it would be in boxes 12A through 12D. So it would have an amount. So for example, if I have a pension, it would have either the codes D, E, F, G, H, and S. So if I have a pension, or a 401k or something like that that I'm contributing to on my W-2, it will have box 12 will show, say, 4,000, and it will say D for a 401k. The do not include the amounts reported in box 12 that have DD. That's your health insurance benefits, so that wouldn't be included. Any non-education benefits such as disability death pension. So if I am living with my single parent mom, but my father died in the line of duty, and my mom receives a pension from the military, that would go in here. So any untaxed income not reported. This is the question that sometimes has, more than likely has amounts as opposed to all the other ones. Any workers' comp or disability benefits. So untaxed income. So Social Security disability, you may be required to file an income tax because it is taxable. That does not go here. It's any untaxed disability income. Are there any questions about this section? Nope. Nope. Okay. All right, so the parent asset information. It's going to ask you when you're going through if you want to answer questions about the parent asset information. You don't necessarily have to, unless the assets, it's going to say, do your parents' assets exceed, I think it's 23,000. If you select no, you don't have to answer this question. Or you could just select yes and put zeros in here if that's the thing. But as of today, what is your parents' total current balance of cash, savings, and checking accounts? So it's as of the time that you're filing the FAFSA. What is in your parents' cash, savings, and checking accounts? As of today, what is the net worth of your parents' investments, including real estate? That does not, if the student's parents own their own home, the value of the home does not go in here. The home that they're living in. If they own a second home and they are renting that out as a rental property, that would go in here. And if they own any businesses or farms or anything like that. Any questions about parent assets?
Yes, so
Okay.
the other untaxed income question prompted me to ask you to explain this to the group. So I've had several families that have a Social Security death benefit, like a parent passes away and the child receives that Social Security. And the question is always, it's for the student, but whose side of the FAFSA do we put it on, the student or the parent?
So whose name is receiving it, the student or the parent?
Right, that's right.
Yeah, so if it's in the student's name, it's reported as the student. If it's in the parent's name, it's reported as the parent.
Thanks, that's what I was prompting you to say. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
We do have, well, while you say there's a pause there, there was another question in the chat. What is meant by investments, question mark, 440, 401k, question mark, IRA, question mark.
So the 401k would not go in the investments because that would go back on the 401k question. So you don't double report. So there's I went through the specific question that asks about if you have any retirement plans or anything like that. That's where that goes. Don't include that in your investments. That would be double reporting the amounts. Investments would be if they have like stocks, bonds, Bitcoin. That is, yeah, that would be reported there, Bitcoin.
What if your parent doesn't want to give financial income?
So if the parent doesn't want to give financial information, then they don't have to. Back to the dependency question, it would ask, do I want to answer questions about my parent? They would select no, I'm unable, and they'll have to contact the financial aid office. Now, I will say, if they are unwilling to still provide financial information on the FAFSA, that does not make the student an independent student. If the student has contact with the parent and has a relationship with the parent that's not, abusive or anything like that, then the student would still be considered a dependent student. If the parent is unwilling to provide financial data, then the FAFSA cannot be completed, so to speak. And in that case, the student would only be eligible for a federal unsubsidized student loan. I didn't go through the student financial data section in this, just because it's the same questions, just geared to the student. So if your student filed taxes, then the student will need to link their information using the IRS data retrieval tool. If the student is unable to use the IRS data retrieval tool because they were married or the marital status doesn't link or something like that, then they would go through and put all the information in from the 1040 and answer the same questions, including the asset question. So once the student and the parent, or excuse me, the parent and the student financial sections are completed, the student can sign, the student will have the congratulations screen, and then they will receive what's called a student aid report, or a SAR, and that will be emailed to them, and that will detail the if a student has been selected for verification, which means that the financial aid office that they select of the school that they applied to or use the FAFSA for, will reach out and say, you have to provide additional documentation to us if they've been selected for verification. The student aid report will also detail what the student's EFC is, that it's the expected family contribution. It's important to know that the EFC, that term, and this formula for financial aid, the last time that you're going to hear about it is the 23-24 FAFSA. After the 23-24 FAFSA, EFC is no longer going to be a thing. It's going to be changed to the Student Aid Index as part of the FAFSA simplification process. So the 24-25 FAFSA is going to look a little different, and the questions may be a little different. So this is specifically for this FAFSA, this training. The next year we'll have to do another one of these with the updated changes to the FAFSA. Are there any questions? Oh, sure.
Yeah, Kat. So I have a specific question. I'm sitting with a student and their family. We're filling out the FAFSA. We get to this page. If I have them in front of me right then and right there, is the SAR, because I remember the SAR would almost come out automatically where a student, it would like, it's kind of like a notification hitting their email account. Is that how that works? So if I have that student and parent in front of me, I can say, now go to your account and see if the SAR has hit your account or your email. Is that a thing anymore, or do they have to wait over maybe 48 hours to get our actual SAR show up?
So it could take up to 3 to 5 days. That's what the Department of Ed says, but it's usually pretty quickly. On this congratulation page, they will be able to see if they have been selected for verification. It usually tells you right away. And they'll be able to see that EFC. And it will explain what the EFC is. So in another training, we can go over what the EFC means. So after this FAFSA is submitted, what happens next? What aid can you get based off of this information? This was just specifically training to how to answer these questions on the FAFSA, not necessarily what happens next, but once the FAFSA is submitted, that EFC will determine federal aid eligibility and certain state eligibility.
Right, so I'm asking that question from the assumption that some of us on this call either may be at a FAFSA training session because we're volunteering, so the student or parent we're sitting with is not our everyday person we're seeing, right?
Mhm.
This may be one only time we see them. We may be working in a community center. You know, we may see them, they walk in this one time, once they go out, we won't see them anymore. We won't have a connection with them. So I think it's important for us as the practitioners to know what our boundaries are and how much we can get information to and from the student before they leave our presence, because once they're gone, sometimes some of them will be gone, right?
Yeah. So the student aid report is just that. It's a student aid report. It doesn't necessarily say that you're going to get this amount of aid from a college, right? It's just saying that you could, like if they're eligible for a federal Pell Grant, it will say you could be eligible, you're eligible for a federal Pell Grant. It doesn't necessarily say the amount on there, I don't believe, anymore. But that would be up to the school to notify the student what aid they're eligible for. That's including any merit-based scholarships, any institutional scholarships or grants, any federal grants, any state grants, estimated maybe might be on that award letter. If they're eligible for a federal Pell Grant, and I should say this so that no one's confused, if they're eligible for a federal Pell Grant, that amount of the federal Pell Grant is not going to change from school to school to school. So if a student's eligible for a $4,284 federal Pell Grant, they're going to get $4,284 at each school that they're doing. That amount's not going to change.
Right. So my question really more so is about what information, what information can we make sure they know about and look at before leaving our presence. So if they're not, so it sounds like what I need to say, they're not, I remember there was a time when the SAR would, like you said, they're going to be able to see it when they get this electronic version. Well, let me ask another question practically. Can we print that SAR if we bring that up in front of us right there, sitting right there, once they get this congratulations note, they can click on something, I'm assuming, and see their SAR. Can we print that out right then and right there and say, okay, here it is, now I see where you're going, and talk with them further about things? Because again, we may not see them after that day.
Yeah, most times you can print out the student aid report and they'll be able to see that information right away if they're selected for verification. So I would recommend to you guys who are with the students, if you see on this congratulations page that it says you've been selected for verification. In that case, I would convey to the student that they need to reach out to the financial aid office at the schools that they've applied to, because any award letters that are sent to the student before the student completes verification are estimated, and they can change, right? The amount of financial aid can change because of verification. And verification is just if the school needs to request sometimes additional documentation. And additional documentation can vary from school to school, but for the most part, it's going to be a worksheet that confirms the number in the household, confirms the number in college. It's going to ask for both probably maybe parent 1040s, parent W-2s, 1099 schedules, all of that good stuff. And the students as well, if the student earned but didn't or earned wages and maybe necessarily didn't file taxes, will still need the W-2.
Is the SAR going to immediately come up on this confirmation page for all students? That's where he's going.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And I don't always see it with all students, to be honest. Like sometimes if there's a question or if something's not complete, it won't come up, but yeah.
I mean, it's usually available, but most times, I mean, they'll always get an emailed copy to whatever email address that they use for their FSA ID. They will always have an emailed copy.
I guess I also just want to make sure and be clear as a form of practice, as practitioners sitting with someone filling it out. And maybe this is, well, because Ron lives with us in Philly, knows this space around this side of the table. Would we recommend that before a student, that we really take a hard look and have the student take a hard look at their email address that they're putting in? And then are there recommendations, because some students are used to using their high school email accounts versus a personal account and that kind of thing. So how much attention should we spend time on email communication between federal student aid and the student?
I mean, I would just recommend to the student to use a personal email address, unless your school can guarantee that the student will have lifetime access to that email, their school email. If you can't guarantee that the student will have lifetime access to their school email, do not use it for the FSA ID or the FAFSA, because whatever email address that they use is going to be used to do like password recovery, things like that. And I'm not saying that if they happen to use it and then they no longer have access to it, there is a way to change it, but sometimes it's a pain in the butt to do that, to change, especially if they forgot their password and they no longer have access to the account, the email account, the school account. And they might have to call the Department of Ed. They might have to call the FAFSA. And I'll be realistic with you guys. If you need to call the FAFSA for any reason, especially right now, it's peak season, you're looking at least 40 minutes to an hour wait time. So, and that's just for password recovery and things like that. Sometimes it could be more depending on the day. And that's just from personal experience being on hold with them. So I'll just say that I would highly recommend using a personal email account. That's an excellent question. When communicating with the FAFSA team, will the confirmation number or date release number be helpful to save? It can be, yes. It would find the information faster, but it's not necessary when you're talking to them to have it saved. If you want to, you absolutely can. It can help look up an account quicker, as opposed to just social security number or something like that, or date of birth, or the date that the FAFSA was filed. But the school won't ask for that.
All right, so I'm going to pick up where Kat left off. Thank you so much, Kat. Appreciate it. A wonderful job. I'm Ron Felder, the PHEAA Access Partner for Philadelphia. Right now, you are at the confirmation page for once you complete the FAFSA. And hi, is there some? Let me just read this question. Hi, sometimes we can't connect to the parents. Great. Okay. So I will get to that question as soon as we get done with our presentation due to time purposes, as I see Candace neck just twitch a little bit. Once you get to the confirmation page, you're on the right-hand side of the screen, you are going to see the Start Your State Grant Application link. That is where your PHEAA application will be at. Now, here's the fun part about this particular link. A lot of your information will auto-populate from the FAFSA directly onto your PHEAA state grant application. However, if you can go to the next slide for me, Kat. If you happen to lose track of your browser goes down, or in your Chromebooks in the Philadelphia School District, we definitely have that a lot. You can always go back into go back to that previous slide for me, Kat. The one that I just there you go. Nope. One more. Nope. No. Go forward. One more. There you go. You can always go to PHEAA.org And on the right-hand side, actually under where it says sign in, borrowers tab, and student, that's where you will create your Access account. You can create your username and password that way. Sometimes it does take some days to share over to our side, because when it comes to the federal side and the state agency, it does take a couple of days for information to share over. However, if you go back, Kat, to the previous slide, once you click onto the state grant application, and your information auto-populates, as you will see, this is the beginning of your application. You want to double check to make sure that your legal name is correct. Your legal name has to reflect your name that's on your Social Security card, as well as your email address and your Social Security number, and your date of birth is up to date on this information with where you're at. Now, this particular application, you really don't need the parents' help, because believe it or not, the student can complete 100% of the application by themselves. So you want to go to the next slide. Next one. Thank you. Our FEA state grant deadline is for our standard traditional schools this year is May 1st of 2023. Those are for our all new and all new applications. Also, if you are a student who actually is already in school, your application will automatically be renewed once you complete the FAFSA, unless you are going to a new college. If you plan on going to a new college, you will have to go into the FEA application and update it yourself, students, on the school, so that your funds can go directly to that new school that you're going to. If you do not, the funds will go back to the school that we assume that you were previously going to, and that is actually going to be left on your hand. However, another deadline is August 1st. That is for our open enrollment schools, and that is for our community colleges, trade schools, like Orleans Technical if you're in the Philadelphia area, Pierce College for our open enrollment schools. Now, those type of schools have they enroll all year long, so you understand why their deadline is August 1st. And a big piece in Philadelphia is a lot of students really don't come alive until of what they want to do after May 1st. So a lot of them are non-traditional schools, so they do their first year at CCP or DCC or Monaco or at Bucks. You want to go to the next slide? In order to be a PA state grant eligible, you have to be a Pennsylvania resident a year prior to you applying for the FEA state grant application. High school graduate, you have to meet academic progress. Your enrollment status must be full-time or part-time. You must have the maximum number of grants. Program of study has to be validated via FEA, certified via FEA. And you have to make sure that you are not in default and making student academic progress. You want to go to the next slide? So FEA's dependency questions are a little different than the federal application. We only ask 5 questions on the FEA state grant application in comparison to the FAFSA form. Our dependency questions sometimes do require additional information to be sent back to us to make sure that we are verifying that we can process your aid efficiently. So if you are selected for verification via FEA and you have to provide the information, I do tell everybody to make sure that you submitted it as soon as possible, because you want to make sure that all your aid and everything is up to on track and there are no issues prior to you starting your start date at your school. If you're an emancipated minor or a legal guardianship, you will have to provide that paperwork as well, or unaccompanied youth. You want to go to the next document? I'm sorry, the next slide. Okay, so a lot of people want to know the numbers. So here is the number. The maximum amount of award for your FEA state grant this year is $5,750. Now, FEA awards based off a cost of tier. So depending on how expensive your cost of tier of your school's cost of tier is this year, that is based on your awards. Now, for example, I'll give you a little example. That $5,750 will go to schools like Drexel, UPenn, Villanova. If you're going to like schools, and I'll put Kat on the spot, like Westchester, IUP, Bloomsburg, you will not receive that max of 5,750 because of the cost of tier of that particular school, and actually will be lesser if you're going at a community college of Philadelphia. Now we do submit.
I was going to say the maximum for any of the PASFAA schools, so any of the state schools, is $4,894 for PA state grant funds.
Correct. Yep. Now, if you do plan on going out of the state of Pennsylvania, yes, the rumor is true. You get more money by staying in state. However, we will submit funds to these particular states, institutions: Delaware, DC, Massachusetts, Ohio, West Virginia, and Vermont. Now, we're only going to submit up to $600 an academic year, unless you're a veteran, and then it'll only be $800 an academic year. So you really want to think about, if you do leave out of the state of Pennsylvania, are you going to get the large amount of funds that you need to not be in so much debt? And you must be at least half-time enrolled or eligible. So if you go to the next slide. We do have other state grant programs that I definitely want you to look into. I'm gonna mention some of them. I'm gonna go through them, but I'm going to just touch on a couple hot topic state grant programs, especially for Philadelphia. So we have the PA State Work Study Program. That's one. We also have the Pennsylvania National Guard Educational Program. We have the Pennsylvania Guard and Military Family Education Program. Those are for our families. Those are for the members who are actually served in the armed forces, and the family members actually do receive a small portion of an additional grant. A big hot topic, and Tom and Candace and everybody in the Philadelphia College Prep Roundtable will tell you, the PHEAA grant. The PHEAA grant is a big hot topic, especially in Philadelphia area. PHEAA does administrate the funds. However, the Department of Human Services writes the policies and procedures. So I just want everybody to hear that again. PHEAA administrates the funds. However, the Department of Human Services writes the policies and procedures. There is a separate application that you have to have on file for the PHEAA application, as well as the FAFSA and the PHEAA state grant application. Another hot topic is the Pennsylvania Foster Independence Tuition Waiver Program. Now, here's the trick about this. You can actually, the student, if they do qualify for this program, can receive a tuition and fees waiver. However, their room and board is covered via their federal loans, or if they want to use other source of funds to pay for that. But it will only cover your tuition and fees. Blind and deaf for my hearing impaired folks. The post-secondary education graduate program, that's another program that that you definitely want to look into, as well as a partner for access and higher education. That's our PATH program. And then another big, and the last two big topics, the last two big programs that actually hit Philadelphia that really do make an input, a stamp and an input on our students, is the PA TIP application for our agricultural, for those students who are going into HVAC, electrical, trade schools. That is a separate application. And then for my Ready to Succeed, Kat and those folks on the post-secondary side, they'll tell you those are for my sophomore, juniors, and seniors who are actually in college already. They have to have a 3.2 GPA or higher, and they are nominated via the school. If you have any additional questions in regards to these programs, you can always go to PHEAA.org, or you can email me separately, and I can give you the links, and you can research those on your own free time. Definitely, and we do have other programs throughout the year that goes over PHEAA and PA Foster Independence Tuition Waiving Program throughout the city. So just look forward to that if you see those on publications.
So Ron, I have a question from a practitioner standpoint. I'm sitting with a student, and again, you know, some of us are serving in school, some of us are serving folks who are out of school, who are not in school. Are these opportunities, these other state programs, I heard you mention one or two of them, they have to find the application and apply for it separately. Are the remainders like automatic, like if the student, somebody else is deducing and seeing the application saying, oh, this student can apply for that, and we're going to apply them? Or does that mean we have to sit with students and we should try to figure out whether or not they're eligible for all these things and have them go find them?
Well, sometimes, so that's a two-part question. Sometimes when the students filling out the FAFSA, they might actually identify themselves as a foster independent, as a foster care student, or a student who's in CHAFE or DHS custody. And when they do that, you know, a lot of the high school counselors do, they're very knowledgeable on finding those additional filling out those additional applications with the students. Did that answer your question, Tom?
It kind of does, but I'm not assuming that everyone on this call, for example, is sitting with students in a school building all the time, knowing who they are and their backgrounds. So again, that's why I keep framing these questions from if I'm sitting with the student first time, sight unseen, and they're gonna leave me that day, and I'm not gonna see them ever again, which is kind of like the lowest common denominator of this. How do I talk with them probably this one time and say to them, okay, it looks like you might be eligible. So like you said, with the foster kids, that's going to kind of make sense because CHAFE, I'm assuming, you didn't say it, but I'm assuming CHAFE is supposed to be for foster kids and foster kids only. Am I saying that right?
You are saying that wrong. CHAFE is for students who are in DHS services. So
okay.
Just the PA foster independence tuition waiver is for students who identify as foster care. Now, here's the trick about it, because there's a loophole. Some kids that are in DHS custody are not in foster care.
Right, got you. I got you. So that's a discriminating fact that we all need to be, all of us who are on this call need to be clear about. That right, because again, from me, I lived that CHAFE was just covering foster care kids, but now I'm hearing that is a wider bandwidth. But my bigger question is, again, if I'm not living with this student on an everyday basis, I don't know this student to know them, but I want to make sure they access all the resources they need to access. What am I saying to them to say after they've done their FAFSA and they filled out their PHEAA application, here are these other opportunities you may be qualified for? Am I telling them they got to go find them themselves, or is somebody on the other end, because they did a PHEAA application, will identify them?
So I would suggest that you ask the student just like this. Well, you approach the student just like this. Hey, here's some additional programs. If you feel that one of these programs addressed your personal life as of today, then you want to look further into it. And if it does, fit your life, then you should apply for this for the application if there is a separate application. Yes.
Okay, that's all we're to go. Thank you.
Okay.
That's it.
There you go. Next
Can
slide for
I
me. No,
just
Candace.
add
No,
little thing?
no, Candace. No, I'm just
Oh,
fine.
Rob.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna ask you if you have it's further helping Tom's question. Is there a list of these different programs that actually have a separate application? And is there a list of the ones that do not?
So if you go on PHEAA.org underneath tools and resources, you will see our special programs there. And you can see the breakdown of what qualifies for you to apply for these particular special programs. And if you're looking for the application, the links for those applications are actually right there at in that field as well. So and just to piggyback on Tom, before Tom even mentioned it, every year I do a counselor workshop too in Philadelphia that goes over these special programs, and they are always in the first or second week of September. So next year, if you want to register, once that link gets publicized and you're on our mailing list, and PCPR does a great job of promoting this for PHEAA as well, please feel free. It's open to the public.
And I'll just add that PASFAA, so the organization that I represent, which is the Pennsylvania Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, we are creating a kind of phone a friend contact information list, so that if you're sitting down with a family and you have a question about the FAFSA and you don't know what to do, you can contact someone from that phone a friend. So if you have a specific question, like a dependency question, I don't know what I should put, I don't know what the student should put, you can contact somebody from that tree. So you'll have that ability too. And I believe Tom will be sharing that out soon.
Before we even open it up for questions, what I want to do is actually call Miss Dr. Kim McCurdy on the screen, and she is going to go over the FAFSA Go website, and then we will open up for general questions. So Dr. Kim McCurdy, you have the floor.
Hey, Ron, it's great to see you. It's so nice to be here with everyone. Okay, so the link that I put in the chat, this is the PA-FAFSA Go website. PA-FAFSA Go is a collaboration between 5 folks in Pennsylvania. We started National Governors Association, put together a group from the governor's office, from PDE, FHEAA, PSCA, the Pennsylvania School Counseling Association, PACAC, the Pennsylvania Association for College Admission Counseling, too many acronyms. And there was also a PASFAA representative on there as well. And so we look to see what kind of a campaign or what kind of collaboration could we put together. Some states do things like the FAFSA Frenzy. In Tennessee, 9 states have moved to universal FAFSA, where it's a requirement that high school students complete a FAFSA as a part of their graduation. And we don't necessarily want to do that. So this was our answer to universal FAFSA. We know that we don't have the school counselors to complete a FAFSA for every student. We know we would need a robust opt-out process. So we thought, let's create a campaign, let's work together to see what kind of resources we can share broadly. And then we will measure and see if this has impact on FAFSA completions throughout the state. So this is the website. And we were having our PDE websites were down and revamped. And so we were having some connection, some breakages in some of the links. I believe that those have been fixed. So if they haven't, you can certainly bookmark this page directly. But the PA-FAFSA Go then is this campaign with these 5 collaborative partners. This explains what the campaign does. And then at the bottom, there are a variety of resources, and we're going to be adding to these. I hope to have a best practices sharing site as well once we get going. So this will take you to the FAFSA and the FSA ID process. The FAFSA toolkit on the PHEAA website is available here. And then we have also a link to the PHEAA website for the FAFSA completion events that are public that we know about. So those will be all updated. And then we also have a peer-to-peer counseling guide. And so this is a program that Slippery Rock initially created, and it's for universities who have work study students, or maybe your organization hires interns. And so this is a peer-to-peer that you would be calling that peer or that near peer student to say, hey, have you completed your FAFSA? If you haven't, here's some resources. Let me connect you to someone else. So all of that information is in here. We are also adapting this to the school counselor. So Karen Rubican is working on that. So school counselors would be able to utilize this model as well. Going back to the website, we have NCAN's National College Attainment Network. Their FAFSA resources are here. The PA College Advising Corps. So these are our friends that have counselors in high schools that also utilize that near peer model. And they have a lot of resources and can help if you need information about FAFSA completion. And then higher ed planning materials is here. And this is where you can order the PA-FAFSA, and I'm not seeing it. Here it is, the PA-FAFSA Go kit. So PHEAA has has branded some of their materials. There are 4 pieces that schools or counselors can order that have the PA-FAFSA Go brand on there. Once you can access this webpage, there's also an opportunity to commit to focus on FAFSA. And so this will be an opportunity for any institution or high school, anyone, any community organization. So the focus is an acronym because we love them. So you're facilitating events beginning October, compiling resources, uniting team members, and supporting students to complete the FAFSA. And then you just certify that you are doing that. You click that you commit, you submit, and we have 71 partners so far that have committed to focus on FAFSA. And my apologies, I've been a little out of sorts the last few weeks, but I'm back from my travels, and we're going to be getting some emails out to the folks who have committed to focus on FAFSA. One of the things we're going to do is to promote the PHEAA materials to make sure that everyone has access to all of those resources. And then there'll be some other communications moving forward. We did have a launch on October 3rd at Slippery Rock University, and there is a PA cast, and I'm not sure how to, I was going to put this in the chat as well if you want to look at that. We had a lot of partners just committing, that this is going to be a year-long campaign. We have a task list of things that we're working on. Karen and Will are working to see which high schools haven't engaged PHEAA or any other educational partners to have FAFSA completion events on campus or at their high school. We have an upcoming podcast with PHEAA. We're going to be recording that on Friday. So we'll make sure that that's public and makes its rounds. There were a lot of opportunities to make sure that this remains top of mind. It's not just October, complete your FAFSA, and then, April, folks are scrambling. Oh, we have to meet that May 1st deadline. We want to keep this top of mind all through the holiday season, all through the spring before the state grant deadline. So more to come, but I was excited to be a part of this group. Thanks to Will, who's on the call, who's provided a lot of the information. I think that we have the right people at the table this year, and I think that this has some really good implications for our students, that we can provide a lot of cohesive resources for students, and that, if you want to complete a FAFSA, we're going to be able to get you those resources that you need.